Alrighty, so we have the back squat. The back squat is probably the easiest way to load up the most amount of weight in a squat position. However, it is probably the most dangerous because of the axial loading that goes through the back. So we're going to teach you what to do, what not to do, and why we're doing it. So first of all, what we want to do is make sure we have our bar situated across our traps. So you can see here, the bar should be sitting across the shoulder pad, across the top of the traps, and we should be trying to pull the bar through our body so that we're activating the lats. Show us a piss poor effort. So relax the elbows. This is how most people set up for a squat. You can see here, he's caving through the midline and he's not tight enough through here. So if we started to add load to that, we're gonna start to see some quadratus lumborum spasm or back pain. So when we set up, we get nice and tight. We set the bar there, let's go back here. And the first movement we wanna see is a hip hinge. The reason why we want a hip hinge is making sure that we have all that load through the posterior chain. We also want to make sure we keep our ribs nice and tight. So you're going to feel the rib cage tucked down towards the pelvis. Now his back's rigid, everything's nice and tight. His load is now going to be distributed through the hammies and the posterior chain. So once he's done that hinge, we can now start making our way down into the bottom of that squat. Same principles apply for this squat. We need to make sure our knees stay just outside or at least open up enough so that we've got range of motion there. You can see his elbows are still behind the bar. The biggest problem we see with this one is elbows relaxing. The lats switch off as we talked about before and you start to cave forward. So keep that bar super tight, in against there. Let's stand tall, finishing off the rep. So the most common problem we see with the back squat is people not creating a big enough hip hinge and therefore all their weight's distributed through their toes. So we're gonna see Harry come onto his toes here. So he comes forward, you see the knees break before the hips do. So now all his weight is coming forward over his toes, and what happens is we need to try and get our weight back, so pause there. We start to shift our weight back halfway through the squat, which leads to a massive lumbar extension, and what we don't want to see is obviously any extension and flexion through the spine, especially when there's axial loading across the back. So you can see here his back's trying really hard to brace when it shouldn't be working that hard. So to compensate or to fix that, what we want to do is overcompensate the hip hinge early on, so we definitely know that our weight's through our heels, and then we can start to slide down into that deep squat, keeping the abs engaged and taking the pressure off the lower back. His abs are engaged, his lats are engaged, he's now deep enough, he's got enough space through the hips because he opened up early and he wasn't squashing himself halfway through that rep. So lots of people do struggle with the back squat, but they tend to persevere through, and that's why we end up with a lot of injuries from the back squat. So we do have a few prerequisites that we want you to be able to hit before we start to see you loading up this back squat. And one is obviously the ankle dorsiflexion and the hip, the ability to get deep in the squat. So we can chock you up for a little bit with some plates under your heels. So show us a back squat, Harry. So chocking up the heels will, like the other squats, help increase that dorsiflexion range. However, if this doesn't help, what we want to see is you go back to the front squat, change that force production and stay nice and light until you do have the mobility. So mobility will be key before we start to load up this back squat.